Hi, thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to the presentation that we're gonna give you. It's 20 minutes or so. It's just some general information on the COVID-19 situation and the vaccine as well. And then we'll open it for Q&A. In the meantime, if you have a question or anything, go ahead and put it in the Q&A section or in the chat. And then once we're done, we'll start taking on those questions. So you can ask us almost anything. I'm not a physician. She's a physician assistant, but we still cannot give you medical advice, right? So consult your own physician or healthcare provider if you have any kind of personal medical question. Should I, should not, etc. Without further ado, let's just get going. From smallpox to COVID-19, a vaccine Q&A. So, we just want to say right off the bat, no conflicts of interest and we're not going to talk about we don't have any holdings in any of the vaccines that we're going to talk about. I do work as a contractor for the College of Physicians. I am the editor of the History of Vaccines project, historyofvaccines.org, if you want to check it out. And History of Vaccines has received donations from folks like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck, and others. But they don't have any editorial input. We keep it completely separate. I never see any of those checks. So, and we don't hold any stake in any pharmaceutical company. We have retirement funds, obviously, but, we don't have any control over that. And yes, Mrs. Najera will eventually get all of my money. So zero conflicts of interest on my end, right? So we've been at this for a year, right? We started last year. We are just about to have the anniversary of the first case, or we just did have the anniversary of the first cases here in the United States. And it's been quite a year. It's been crazy and challenging, especially for those of us working in healthcare and those of us working in public health. And I'm sure for everybody else, right? Everybody with children who had to stay home because they couldn't go to school, people who couldn't go to work, people who were in quarantine, isolation, etc. It's been bad, to say the least. So this is a timeline of events. Back in late 2019, there was all this chatter about this virus in China and Wuhan. There was this cluster of pneumonia cases. Nobody knew what it was or what was going on until word got out that it was a coronavirus. And then everybody's, me as an epidemiologist, I was like, oh, what? No. And then cases just started rolling, right? WHO in January said, hey, this cluster of pneumonia cases, it's worse than you think, and it's spreading. And then by January 21st, we had the first cases in the US. Then a public health emergency of international concern was declared by WHO. The previous times it's happened has been with Ebola in 2014, with 2009 H1N1, and then with SARS before that. And so this was kind of a big deal, right? We all were gearing up for something. The sequence of the novel coronavirus was published in February of 2020, and that's when all these companies started working on the vaccine, because once you have the sequence, you know what those antigens are made of, and you know how to start working on your vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines. 2019, and I'm sorry, in March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic is declared. President Trump then declares Operation Warp Speed to begin in May. And by July 27th, the phase 3 trials of both mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna trials begin, of which we have one of the participants here. She participated in the Moderna trial. The FDA grants the emergency use authorization for Pfizer on December 11th. And then on December 18th, the emergency use authorization goes out for Moderna. More recently, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was authorized on February 27th. And so right now in the United States, we have 3 vaccines that are authorized for emergency use. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of the vaccines, hopefully more pros to try to bring us back to normality, right? But also be aware that in the rest of the world, other vaccines are out there as well. You have the Russian Sputnik vaccine, you have the Sino vaccine from China, you have the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as well. And other smaller vaccine companies are developing their own vaccines and their own vaccine candidates, and they're doing their clinical trials. So just keep that in mind. We like to think of US-centric, but keep that in mind as well of other things that are going on around the world. So this is from the New York Times. I copied it this morning. This is the number, or rather the proportion of fully vaccinated people in the United States as of this morning, according to data from local and state health departments. And what I want you to notice here is the scale, right? The darkest green is about 11%. So we still have a ways to go. It is estimated that herd immunity for COVID-19 is around 70 to 80%. We're not there. We're not even close. We have a few months to go. But at the same time, we've already crossed the threshold where we have more vaccinated people than we've had confirmed cases in the US. So once that starts happening and vaccines start outpacing the pace of new infections, it's going to start having an effect. And certainly some localities have seen now a decrease in the number of cases, but we still have to wear our masks in public. We still have to practice social distancing, wash our hands, travel only when absolutely necessary. I know that I want to go to the beach, right? May I? But we're still there. We're still in a pandemic. Unfortunately, people are still dying, and so we need to continue to be vigilant. And when you get a chance to get your vaccine, go for it. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But this being part of history of vaccines, I have to tell you some history. We have to go a little bit further back to know how 200 years or so of vaccination have brought us to the COVID-19 vaccines. A lot of people are saying, oh, these vaccines are too new. The virus just came out a year ago. How can you have them? Well, much like we have smartphones, much like we can travel in space now, technology moves by leaps and bounds. It's not a arithmetic process. It's a geometric. It's like it just shoots up. So this is a picture of Edward Jenner. In 1797, he performed a little experiment. He had noticed that people who contracted cowpox did not get smallpox. And if you've ever seen smallpox, you would be horrified. You just develop all these blisters all over your face, your entire body. 30% mortality, if at the worst, at the best, between 5 and 10% mortality, just a lot. It would travel the world in waves. And Edward Jenner decided that he was going to take some cowpox material from a person with cowpox, and he was going to give it into this child named James Phipps. At the time, children were thought to be property of their parents, and he just asked the dad, "Hey, can I borrow James for a medical experiment?" And that is like, "Just pay me some money," and he did. And so he gave James the cowpox material from a person with cowpox. They took it from the arm, put it in James' arm, and waited a couple of weeks. James didn't get sick from the cowpox. He didn't have the anything pox like, and he got better. And then he took some smallpox, some actual smallpox from somebody, and did the same thing to poor little James. And he didn't get smallpox. He was immune against smallpox by contracting artificially cowpox. And so that's where we get the word vaccine from, the Latin word for vaca, for a cow. And so James Phipps, one of the first documented cases of a medical experiment with positive consequences. And we get the smallpox vaccine, the first vaccine, a little bit over 200 years ago, right? 220 years ago. Later on in the 1800s, two French scientists, Roux and Pasteur, they decide that maybe we can attenuate, or we can make the virus that gives disease, or the bacteria also that gives disease, we can make it a little bit safer. We can do something to it. We don't know what, because at the time they still hadn't figured out germ theory too well, but they figured that they could attenuate this virus or this bacteria that they could see on the microscope. They couldn't see the virus, but the bacteria, and make it a little bit safer and give it to people. And maybe that'll cause an immune reaction without causing the disease. And you get the rabies vaccine, you get the cholera vaccine, you get the diphtheria vaccine, and so on and so forth. So this is now the 1800s. Medical technology has advanced. Germ theory is coming into its own. Microscopes are widely available. Laboratories are popping up, and they're starting to experiment and do all these things based on all the literature and everything that had come shortly before them. Then in the 1900s, we had the influenza pandemic of 1918 that everybody's comparing to this pandemic. Estimated that something like 500 million people around the world got infected. 50, maybe 10% died. It was pretty bad. It brought everything to a halt. People wore masks, and interestingly enough, an anti-mask league got created. So what is past is prologue, as some would say. But from these experiences and with fighting polio, the next leap in vaccine technology came along of, hey, maybe if we can grow the virus in the lab and kill it, and give it as a shot instead of the way that you would get it, right, breathing or eating it, then maybe we can immunize that way. And so that was the case for the polio vaccine. Albert Sabin came up with the oral polio vaccine, which was based on attenuation, not in killing. But now we have more and more ways of doing this. Later on, more technology would come about with other vaccines as well. In the 1970s and 1980s, scientists thought, well, maybe I don't have to give you the whole virus. I don't have to give you the whole bacteria. I can just give you a piece of it, because the understanding of human immunology got better. And so we scientists, and so scientists realized that, if you were exposed to only a fraction of the virus or a fraction of the bacteria, an antigen, a little protein on the surface of these critters, then you would elicit an immune response. And this is where we get the hepatitis B and HPV vaccines. One of the more significant vaccines is the HPV vaccine, because it can prevent cancer. And to talk about it is my lovely wife, Deanna.
So yeah, the HPV vaccine is a novelty because it is the first vaccine against cancer. And so this actually was worth the Nobel Prize and then some. And so this was started back in the 1970s, and he was extracting virus particles from warts and eventually from cervical cancer biopsies. And so he was kind of teasing through these two parallel processes of looking at the plantar warts. He was looking at herpes simplex virus, and then all these biopsies that he was asking people to send him and was extracting. And he found that over and over, these two specific strains, HPV 16 and 18, were in the vast majority of the cervical cancer biopsies. And he thought, I have an idea. And he said, so he called in the 1980s, contacted pharmaceutical companies and said, hey, we can make a vaccine to prevent cancer. And the pharmaceutical company said, meh, probably not. And so they didn't see the value in it. They said people aren't going to uptake in it. It's just cervical cancer. It's not that many people. And they really didn't pursue it any further. And he continued to do research and publish. And it wasn't until the 1990s that they sort of revisited this idea of preventing cancer through a vaccine. And then in 2006 is when we have our first HPV vaccine that's been licensed. And we're actually seeing already those young girls and then eventually young boys that are being vaccinated, the cervical cancer rates are dropping. And not just cervical cancer. This was the thing, unintended positive consequences. We're seeing reductions in anal cancer, penile cancers, but also head and neck cancers. And what we're actually now in some jobs requiring HPV vaccination for, such as like dental hygienists, other people that are involved with the head and neck, but also like laser, where you're doing your like laser hair removal in dermatology. They're really recommending it because we're recognizing that we are aerosolizing the virus when doing these aesthetic procedures. So this is that we have a little bit of knowledge, we get a lot more knowledge, and we realize we did something good decades ago, and we're now starting to see those positive consequences.
So a lot of people have asked me, how did we get this vaccine for coronavirus so fast? And answer number one is, it wasn't that fast. We've been working on vaccine technology for 220 years. And so it's built up. And the answer number two is, the mRNA vaccine technology has been around since the 1990s. And the first time that it was used was in 1990 to treat diabetes insipidus in mice. So these mice were lacking a hormone, and they were given the mRNA vaccine to put a little bit of mRNA into the glands that would produce this hormone to trigger the creation of the hormone. So that's what mRNA does. When you need to create a hormone or a protein, when you eat a lot of sugar and you need to make insulin, your nucleus of your cell shoots off an mRNA signal to the rest of the cell, telling them, hey, everybody, this is the code of how do you make a protein. And so scientists thought, okay, well, if we just tell the cell artificially that they need to make a protein, we don't need to rely on the broken mechanism of not having the gene there for that protein. And so since 1990, they've been working on this vaccine, but a lot of it has gone into cancer research, because the thinking was, well, if a cell turns cancerous, it's going to display certain proteins on its surface. But if we teach the immune system beforehand how to react against those proteins, then we might be able to prevent cancer, right? Because when the cell turns cancerous, the immune system will take it out. And one of those ways is by teaching cells how to make that cancer protein without the cell actually being cancerous. And so mRNA was at play there by telling the cell, this is how you make the protein. The cell then presents the protein to the immune system, and then you get the immune response. So it's been around since the 1990s, and so mumps vaccine continues to be the undisputed, undefeated, never lost champion of vaccines in going from conception to actual market for 4 years. So sorry, mRNA vaccine, you didn't get that. In 2005, scientists came up with a breakthrough. When they were given this mRNA vaccine, a lot of the times the immune system would react against the mRNA before it could reach the cells and would destroy it. And so you had to give a lot of it to really get to the cells. But in 2005, they had this breakthrough of actually coating the mRNA in a lipid envelope, and a lipid nanoparticle. Then it would evade the immune system and get to the cells where they needed to go to get the signal going. And the thing about 2020 and Operation Warp Speed is that it provided a lot of funding. So instead of doing things sequentially as you're studying them, you're doing them in parallel. So they started working faster. And not only that, but that led to a lot of collaboration between pharmaceutical companies. There's still some competition, right? You're still competing, but there was a lot of more collaboration this way because there was a lot of funding for it and for the clinical trials and to get everything rolling. So that's one good thing that came out of the Operation Warp Speed funding. So a couple of drawbacks to this vaccine is that they need to be stored at very, very low temperatures. And so not everybody has those refrigerators. Cold chain, which is taking the vaccine in a cold way and storing it and taking it to very far away places, especially in low and middle income countries, has always been a challenge. We see it all the time with polio. Polio would have been gone by now were it not for the need to take it to very far off places and very hot climates and not having the infrastructure to do so. And now with this vaccine, at the county where I work as an epidemiologist, it was pretty expensive to get those refrigerators up and running. And we cannot take the vaccine to any of the neighborhoods because it's got this storage requirement. So and then it also requires at least 2 doses to really get going. And we can talk a little bit in the Q&A about the side effects of the doses because they do happen. And so we just wanted to tell everybody, yes, the side effects are real, but they're not as bad as getting COVID.
So I'm going to talk about the individual vaccines a little bit. So first is the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccine. That was the first out of the blocks, not because they did cut any corners or anything like that. They just got their data together. They had more participants enroll faster. This is the one that's the ultra cold storage. So they had to make special coolers that could keep it at 70 degrees, centigrade, which is 112 degrees Fahrenheit, because it has to be stored at that temperature, because as soon as you get it up to room temperature, you have just a very short window of time that you have to give the vaccine, or what happens is that mRNA starts to unravel or degrade and it doesn't produce an immune response. And so that's why it has to be super duper duper cold until right before we're ready to give it. And it is 2 doses, about 21 days apart. There is some wiggle room. And there are studies saying, can we delay that second dose? And that's what we're seeing happen in the United Kingdom right now. They wanted to vaccinate everybody with a first dose, then come around and do a second dose. And we don't know if that'll work yet. We don't know if there's that sort of magic window that we have to give both the doses. The initial trial, just to give some, this is US data, was 37,000 people. And so that's about 18,800 that got the vaccine and 18,800 that got a placebo, but still got vaccinated with all the goo, all the stuff that was in there except for the vaccine. So we were also testing all those preservatives that people are very concerned about. No reactions from the preservatives were documented. Then they said, okay, after the second dose, 7 days, that's when we're going to say that it's fully effective and we're going to measure how many cases of COVID happen. And there were 162 cases in the placebo group and 8 cases in the vaccinated group. And you think 95% effective, that's amazing. We're talking about small numbers. It started with 37,000 people and we're talking with under, 170 cases of COVID, because those people were all still wearing masks, washing their hands, and social distancing. None of those things were stopped. So we know that at a baseline, doing that stuff does protect you and still should be continued. So then we have the Moderna trial. And again, full disclosure, I was actually in the Moderna trial. This wasn't because I had some special magic pass. I enrolled and waited and watched my email just like anybody. And I'll tell you, when I got that email saying, congrats, you've been chosen, I still had some hesitation. At that point, no data from any of the studies was available. And I thought, what is this potential impact? So I read the science, we talked it over, and we decided it was the best decision for us. Is how could I ever ask a patient to do it if I wasn't willing to do it? And it was a risk I was willing to take because I've seen the effects of COVID. I saw the air hunger. I saw the devastation. I was talking to families. We had to have those tough conversations. So yeah, it made sense to me to try it, to roll the dice. And it's 2 doses, 28 days apart. Again, a little bit of wiggle room with that. And in the trial, about 30,000 people. And so about just over 15,000 vaccinated and 15,000 unvaccinated. So again, in that, looking at how many people actually completed follow-up. So a lot of people got the shot and then said, I'm good. I don't need to even check back in. So the numbers is closer to 14,000 that completed at least a 2-month follow-up. And that's 185 cases of COVID in the placebo group versus 11 cases in the vaccinated group for a 94% efficacy against infection. And then you have the third one, which is the first, though, of a different category. So this is adenovirus. So this has nothing to do with mRNA, and it's based on adenovirus transport, which is something we've already used previously. So the nice thing about this, though, is it's a lot more stable. So this is regular refrigeration, which means you can put it in the back of the Schwann's ice cream truck and drive it down the road, no problem. It makes it a lot easier to deliver to people that are homebound. You can put it in just a regular cooler versus those ultra cold super freezers. And it is 1 dose at this point. They are currently studying whether or not you're going to need a booster. In the initial trial, you had 43,000, about 21,800 in each of those arms. And of that completed the trial with the follow-up, you had 541 cases of COVID in the placebo group and 182 cases in the vaccinated group. And so that's about 66% effective against preventing symptomatic COVID infection. I want to be really clear. All of these trials, they didn't send you home with like a little spit test where every day you were testing to see if you were COVID positive. We don't know how many asymptomatic cases of COVID may have happened, or if you were able to still transmit it without ever getting sick. The only time that you knew is if somebody logged in and said, I have a fever or I have body aches, and then they got tested. But it was 93% effective at preventing hospitalization and death. So it's just as effective at keeping you off a ventilator and out of the hospital. The other thing is the Janssen vaccine, it was a little bit delayed in rolling out, but it was trialed in South Africa and Brazil against the variants that we're now seeing with higher transmissibility and higher hospitalization rates. We don't know how Moderna and Pfizer, yeah, they're effective, but we don't know how effective. We didn't do this large scale study in those areas. So big questions that we get all the time, vaccinating those that are pregnant. And there has been some conflicting information. So I'm just directly quoting so that you have it right there. The World Health Organization initially said that it should really only be individuals who are high risk of exposure or have severe comorbidities. So basically said healthcare workers or individuals who are like employed in nursing home settings or congregate living, or individuals that have underlying asthma or other like diabetes type 1 and things like that. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, along with the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, said, though, COVID kills. We know that it does. And if you're pregnant, your risk of having a bad outcome with COVID is that much higher. So they said, please vaccinate. It shouldn't just be saved for those that are frontline workers or have comorbidities, but it's still your decision. And it's a conversation to have with your OBGYN provider and talking with your partner about what your risks are and what your concerns are. To note, Mother to Baby, which is a national organization, is actively enrolling people that are pregnant in their trials so they can both study COVID as well as the vaccination and provide more of that real-time data that we absolutely need. So vaccinating those that are breastfeeding, do it. There has been nothing to show any adverse side effects. And again, producing that antibody response produces antibodies in your breast milk, which can protect your baby. There is no evidence that you're transmitting anything negative to the baby. So absolutely, absolutely do it if you can. Kids. Yeah. Now, kids, that's a sticky situation because we think that kids don't get it as often. They don't get as sick. So really, do we need to be vaccinating them? Well, first off, kids have comorbidities too. They have asthma, they have cancer, they have cystic fibrosis, they have a lot of high risk conditions. The other thing is, though, too, is we don't know if those kids are little carriers. You know, we already know they're germ factories. Are they bringing it home and then infecting grandma and grandpa? And if we can prevent that. And the other thing, we do know that COVID infection in kid can have some serious long-term sequelae where you're having cardiomyopathies or enlargement of the hearts, you're having vascular issues, you're having long-term lung scarring. And do we really want to take that for a 12-year-old and then say, sorry, you can never play sports or be in the military or other things that require perfect lung function because you had COVID when you were a kid? I will say, you know, if we got offered that for our kid, it would be, again, a conversation. Yeah. We would have a conversation with our pediatric provider, a conversation with our partner, and deciding what our risks and benefits are for our kiddo. As of right now, they are actively testing adolescents. So 12 and older for both the Pfizer and the Moderna trials are ongoing. And Janssen, which is Johnson & Johnson, has said they're actually going to pivot a little bit and look specifically at immunizing infants, because we know if they get it, it's really detrimental, and pregnant women. That's what their focus is going to be. So vaccinating those who have had COVID already, the short answer is yes, you can absolutely get the vaccine, but we are still in a vaccine shortage area. So should you, shouldn't you? We know right now that you have at least 90 days of immunity when you have a significant COVID infection. That's been shown. That's why we don't have to test you in that 90-day window. That's why you don't have to have necessarily quarantine or isolate if you've been exposed again. But if you get the vaccine, that gives you just that little extra protection. So really, if you have significant comorbidities or had a really rough go of it with your initial COVID infection, you may be you sort of inclined or more encouraged to get the COVID vaccine, a conversation to have with your healthcare provider. The only time you should not get the vaccine is if you've had the monoclonal antibody treatment. And that's because basically it attacks the vaccine and destroys it, because that's what it's trained your body to do. So that's the only time that you do have to wait 90 days before getting vaccinated. So common side effects. I got the first shot and I thought, oh man, I got placebo. I felt nada. That is not true for everybody. A lot of people will have a sore arm, maybe a little bit of body aches, feeling under the weather. We are seeing that if you've had COVID, that first shot is like the second shot for everybody else. It kind of kicks your butt. There is a side effect, they're calling it COVID arm or sometimes Moderna arm, where you get a big red welt. It is not an allergic reaction in the sense of like hives. It is just localized to where you get the vaccine because it is your body's immune response. One of the best things about having everybody sort of on board and having these huge national campaigns is that we're also getting data so much faster. And one of the great ways that we're doing that is the V-Safe. So basically CDC is begging and pleading everybody to get vaccinated to enroll. So they are real-time tracking how many people are having what kind of side effect, how long it lasts, so that we can see the very instant there's any kind of uptick or problem, they're going to be on it. So this is one of those times where it's like people are concerned about giving their personal information. Please give your personal information, because it's really going to keep us all safer in the end.
Yeah, when I got the vaccine on a Friday, that Friday night my arm was really sore. Saturday I was laid out. I had the man flu, and then by Sunday it cleared up. It was like night and day. Sunday afternoon it was done and back to normal. At the office where I work, a bunch of epidemiologists, we got the vaccine on the same day, and same thing. Monday it was all the talk, all we were talking about, like, oh man, you felt that, didn't you? Yeah, and like it was like an earthquake. Like, hey, did you feel that? So yeah, it's true. Those side effects are there. Very few instances of anaphylactic type reactions, because we ask all those screening questions before giving the vaccine. So if you ever had kind of like an anaphylactic reaction, if you carry around an EpiPen, if you have other allergies, that's been cutting down on those reactions. They still do happen. Will somebody die from getting the vaccine? Will somebody die after getting the vaccine? Yes, we're all gonna die. Spoiler alert. But will somebody die from the vaccine? Probably yes. Will we know? Probably not, because it will happen in such a tiny little fraction, much less than car accidents or other such things. I mean, it's going to happen. You know, you're going to have, if you give 320 million people in the United States a vaccine, you're going to have that one person, two people, however many, but certainly not at the rates that would cause any kind of overwhelming public health concern. That's why we ask those questions. That's why we screen people out, to minimize those kind of things. You know, nothing is safe. Nothing is 100% safe. Nothing is 100% effective. But going about it this way is in public health, right? Public health, the bigger picture. You have much more of a chance of other things happening than dying from a vaccine. So you know, just from a public health perspective, highly recommended that if you get an option, then yeah.
So yeah, and speaking about those severe common reactions, so when we say anaphylaxis, that's the new word that's out there. What that means is a very specific thing to medical professionals. So it's a severe reaction where your body says, oh God. And this can be wheezing, where your lungs get tight, your throat swells up, your lips swell, your tongue swells. all over body hives, but it can be immediate vomiting and diarrhea because basically your body just says, oh, and let's go of everything. And can that happen? Absolutely. But the rates, again, are very, very low. CDC has said that that severe reaction kind of title, they're including any significant reaction up to 4 hours afterwards. The reason is when we talk about people saying, I got that second shot and it kicked my butt, that's the next day. That's about 12 to 15 hours afterwards. And you do feel like you get hit by a bus. Like you have body aches, some people have chills, some people just are, so fatigued, but really within 36 hours to 48 hours, you're pretty much back to normal. But we also learned from that. One of the things that we did was vaccinate our local sheriff and police. And what we found is we shouldn't give them the shot in the gun arm because they needed to be able to get their weapon. They needed to be able to get their handcuffs out. So we learned as we go. And what we're learning from this is giving you that 4-hour window for allergic reaction. We're casting a wide net to keep people safe. So that's why we're doing those continued monitoring. And there were some cases of anaphylaxis. And so we needed to be making sure of, is this really a risk or do we need to be pre-treating? How do we do this? And so what we did, look at this, almost 10 million doses. And this is up to January 18th. We're another month and a half ahead of that. There were 47 cases of anaphylaxis. So that's 4.7 cases for every 1 million doses. And for Moderna, a little bit behind, but 7.5 million, there were 19 cases of anaphylaxis, or 2.5 cases for every 1 million doses. And so for comparison of all the vaccines that we give all the time, we still get 1 per 1 million doses. Like it's not a non-event. It's just very, very rare. So who should really get it is those severe reactions. So somebody that says, I swelled a little bit, or I had a little bit of tightness. I had to use my inhaler a couple of times. It makes me kind of uncomfortable to then say, hey, we just primed your immune system and now I'm going to give you a second shot. But there's some caveats to that. We could put you in the hospital, load you up with steroids and Benadryl and have an IV in place and have a team standing by and then give you that second shot. But on a public health scale, we can't do that for everyone. And we know one shot gives you a heck of a lot of protection. So one is better than none, and it's certainly better than putting you into anaphylaxis. But there is some thought that maybe we can give you the opposite shot of whatever you had. And that's because, again, different preservatives and different mechanism of action. We know that PEG, or polyethylene glycol, and polysorbate are the ingredients most commonly used. And they are ingredients in a lot of different things. These aren't newfangled. They're in foods that you already eat, like, preservatives in muffins and things like that. So it's just, if you have already significant food allergies, that's why we say, well, you might want to not think, not do this, or you might want to think twice or consult your healthcare provider about maybe needing pre-treatment if you've had prior severe allergic reactions. And then if you've had reactions to other vaccines, cross-checking. So maybe you had a reaction to tetanus, but you can take the flu, then you can probably take this one based on the different types of preservatives. And that's where, again, talking to an allergen specialist or your primary care provider and really pulling up that list and saying what's in what. Because with multiple different vaccines and different manufacturers, they all use a little different recipe. So, in medicine, we like graphs and charts. It's a lot of information, but some like key take home points. One of the other things that has really been pushed is underserved populations. And so Janssen or Johnson & Johnson specifically, again, targeted populations that were very diverse. So comparatively, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, their vaccinated populations were about 80%. And that's because of difficulty enrolling with trust in the healthcare system, access to the vaccine, and different things like that. Whereas Janssen went specifically out to populations that were much more predominantly minority. So their population of white vaccinated was lower at 62%. And much more diverse populations. So again, people keep focusing on that 66%. It's every single vaccine was over 90% effective at keeping you off a ventilator and keeping you alive. That's the take home point. Yeah, you might get sick, you might miss a day of work, and I'm not minimizing that. Believe me, we all need to work right now, but it's keeping you alive. And that's what we really want, because we've got to go through and get everybody vaccinated to some degree, and then we can go back and play catch up with a more efficacious one. And again, none of these were circulating with the Pfizer and Moderna. They had no variant circulating. We don't know if that efficacy is less. And no deaths from COVID occurred in any of the trials to date. That is just monumental. I don't think you've ever seen any study that looks that good. And they're being totally honest with the data because they know somebody will figure it out. Yeah. So there's no use hiding it. So they've been very public with the data.
So, you saw the proportion of minorities versus white in the studies. And that has made this such an interesting vaccine rollout, because the echoes from the past, or the errors from the past, are being repeated now with priority groups and equity. We have the priority groups that are healthcare, police, firefighters, first responders, health department folks, etc. In the United States, they tend to be whiter, right? They tend to be, more affluent white folks. But we see the data of who got sick and who's dying at a higher rate, and it's people of color, it's underserved populations, low socioeconomic status. And so kind of a mismatch right there, right? But these are the things that we need to deal in public health from a policy perspective and from the actual science perspective. That from a policy perspective, you want to keep the government moving, you want to keep, your healthcare providers working, so you got to vaccinate them first. You got to get the kiddos back to school, so you got to vaccinate the teachers. But then you look at who's driving the epidemic, and it's the people of color, who's living in more congregate setting, more overcrowding, people of color. And so these are the kind of things that need to be discussed at a wider policy level. And then certainly when you have any discussions with your elected leaders, these are the things that we're in the post-mortem of the pandemic, we're going to have to deal with before the next pandemic, because we saw this happening before. We saw this happening with influenza. We saw this happen with polio. We, every time something like this happens, we saw it in the 1918 pandemic in Philadelphia. When you look at who was dying in Philadelphia in 1918, 1919 from the flu epidemic, it was the poorer folks who were living in more crowded housing. So all those things need to be addressed. And I just wanted to bring it up to your attention, because it also begs the question of, well, who is essential? Is somebody who's working at the restaurant essential? To the person who's working at the restaurant, they're essential, right? Is a healthcare provider essential? Well, yeah, because you got to keep the healthcare system operating. But then again, you have other questions of essentialness. And we, unfortunately, because of the public health response, had to put people in categories. There's a whole discussion that can be had about that, of how that was done, and was it good or not, the ethics that went into it, the ethical questions that were asked on who was essential. That's another thing that, we're going to have to analyze before the next pandemic, because again, we in public health made some missteps in there, because some people were deemed essential when they were not, and some people were not deemed essential when they should have been. I'll leave it at that. So the future of vaccines. So like I said, technology is moving very, very fast. When I was in high school, there were no smartphones. Now I can order something on my phone and no problem, which is phenomenal. So where are we going in the future? Well, the mRNA vaccines are probably here to stay, and they're going to be used against other diseases and conditions. Like I said, they were used for hormonal issues, for cancer, etc. The universal flu vaccine, that is the holy grail of influenza. Influenza kind of went away because of everything else that we put into place for COVID. It's going to come back. It's only a matter of time until it comes back, and we all, a record number of flu vaccines were given for this season, 192 million in the United States. Maybe that had a little bit to do with it going away as well. So if we get a universal flu vaccine that doesn't require boosters year after year, yeah, and definitely the flu vaccines that are not based on eggs, because so many people are allergic to eggs, and they're not able to get it. And eggs are expensive, right? And if something happens to the chickens, we're in trouble. So getting these vaccines developed is great. And then in the future, hopefully in my lifetime, personalized vaccines. So they'll take your genome, just like we send it away to 23andMe or whatever to get tested. We can look to see how your immune system will react, and say, well, you know what, you can have an adverse reaction against this vaccine, but it doesn't look like you will against this other one. We recommend this other one. Personalized vaccines in that way, personalized medicine, to try to tailor the vaccine to what fits your immune system best. Hopefully in my lifetime, definitely in my daughter's lifetime. So with that, we'll jump into the Q&A. You can ask us almost anything. So I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I saw one on the chat. So let's go to the chat real quick. Paul and Sue, I have had severe reactions to the albumin used as a stabilizer in the flu vaccine. Should I worry about having similar bad reactions to the COVID vaccine? Thanks.
So, it's a great question. And, looking at the stabilizing agent, if there are other flu vaccines that you can kind of receive and don't have a problem, we do see a lot of cross-reactivity with people with flu because the preservative is fairly similar. And that would be one of those things, if you could get allergy tested or knew if it was exactly this preservative, like I said, they have a breakdown list of this vaccine has this preservative, and then checking if that's the exact same. What we're seeing though is that that PEG and that polysorbate is sort of a wide net, and that you may have reacted to this kind of kissing cousin of that, and your reaction may be more severe than normal, but not all the way to anaphylaxis. So it really depends on what your reaction was, the severity of that, and what it was a reaction to. And those two factors together, I might have a very bad reaction, but it's not to something that's really closely related, or my reaction wasn't great, it's tolerable, then I might go ahead and feel like that risk benefit. And what we are doing when we run vaccine clinics is anybody that has a history of severe allergic reactions to pretty much anything, we're watching you longer. We're letting you sit for 30 minutes instead of 15 just to try and spread that. And we're also saying, like, don't get it right before you go home by yourself, or, make sure there's somebody with you. They can kind of, call 911 if you need to. And again, in some situations, that may be the place you need to be vaccinated in a hospital or a healthcare provider's office.
Okay, Quinn is asking, will this vaccine be similar to the influenza shot in that we'll need it annually? Yet to be determined, right, Quinn? It's the virus has only been with us for a year. The vaccine has been with us for a little bit less than that. If it behaves like other coronaviruses, we're seeing these variants, but they're not complete drifts in the antigens. Not like influenza. So influenza really does change from year to year very fast. HIV is one of the fastest one. That's why we can't quite get a vaccine against it, because it just changes very, very fast. Coronavirus, slower than both of them. So probably not a booster just yet. If it doesn't go completely away, we'll have to see what the epidemiology has to say about that. And then we'll have to see, the folks who got vaccinated didn't get vaccinated until the end of July. So we still need to check up on them and see their immune response to see how long that'll go. All right, Virginia, when do you think we'll be able to know how long immunity from the vaccines will last? And do you have an educated guess how long immunity may last? Yeah, so same thing, right? If it behaves like other infections, the immunity should last a while. And immunity also, what also plays into immunity is boosting. So if it doesn't go away completely, you're going to have the immunity from the vaccine and it'll get boosted as long as the virus is with us. You see this with childhood diseases. That's probably the main reason why we continue to be immune so late into our adulthood, is because children still carry around, well, before vaccines, they still carry around things like measles and chickenpox, et cetera. So you got boosted. It remains to be seen how this one will be that way. I wish that it is long lasting, and I wish that it doesn't need boosting for that to happen, that it just goes away. SARS in 2003 completely went away. That virus has not been around since 2003. MERS in 2011, they're both coronaviruses. They came and went. This one triggered the pandemic, so hopefully it'll go away in that sense as well. Question for you: Will being allergic to amoxicillin matter when getting the shot?
Not that we've seen. So I will say, I'm helping run some of our vaccine clinics. And so we have screening questions that you have to answer before you come. And our big screening questions are, anaphylaxis. So again, that severity of response, because our concern is, does your body sort of not have it goes 0 to 60? Like, does it not have an in between? So if you have a super severe reaction to other things like bees or iodine or whatever, then that means you have the potential for that. Amoxicillin by itself has nothing to do with the vaccine. So that is not a contraindication, but it's more, is your immune system kind of a primed immune system? So I saw another question too about the timing as far as the temperature excursions. So this is where you've seen studies, or you've seen reports. There was the one where there was a snowstorm in the truck and they just vaccinated everybody up and down the line. This is what we do at the end of the vaccine clinic, is we start timing. These are the number of people that are registered. These are the number of appointments that we have. These are the number of doses that we have. And we try to get it right on, but people don't show up, or they have a conflict and they can't make it, or we get that magical extra dose out of a vial. And so it doesn't always line up. So then we do the same thing. We have a standby list and we're scrambling. Can you be here within the next 30 minutes? And that's why it's so important that you have trained personnel that are following that. And we start a timer. Every time we pull a vial out of the refrigerator, we say, okay, this one expires at this time. The companies have said, if it's outside of that window, toss it. They don't want to take the chance of you thinking you're immune or immunized and you're not. So they say, if it's outside of that window, vaccinate them with a fresh dose that isn't either out of the temperature or out of that time window.
Has there been any, Lee asks, has there been any collaboration with vaccine development in other countries? And in your opinion, would this be beneficial? Yeah, it would be very beneficial, obviously, right? Because we, the United States, we're not the end all be all of all knowledge. A lot of vaccines have been developed in other countries that then make their way over here. Rabies vaccine, Pasteur in France, the Sabin vaccine against polio, which has led to the almost eradication of polio. That one was developed in collaboration with the USSR during the Cold War, and it still was brought back to the US and accepted here. I keep saying that it's silly to put any kind of flag on a vaccine. When the news of the Russian vaccine came out, the data didn't come with it, and hence the skepticism over that. Had the data come out just like it did for these vaccines, then we could have evaluated it right from an objective point of view. But again, it's silly to put a flag on them. Hopefully this leads to even more collaboration. We're becoming smaller with mass communications, and we're all sharing a lot of information. So hopefully pharmaceutical companies, at least when it comes to vaccines, will stop competing with each other and just collaborating a little bit better before we end up in a similar situation.
And remember that before this, vaccines were not a way to earn money, because you're vaccinating, you're preventing disease. So it wasn't something that you like, it was more of the kind of like charity thing. There wasn't a lot of funding in it. And so that's why we were saying like, oh, do we really need a vaccine against SARS or MERS? Probably not. They kind of disappeared. And same thing with Ebola. It blows up in a big way. It has the potential to be really, really bad, but it's been burning itself out. So there hasn't been that impetus to sort of let's work together and get a new vaccine out for that. But then you have this, and you saw again, everybody, all those doors that have been built and all those walls that have been built were taken down. And we said, hey, I know that you were doing this. Can I borrow this information? Hey, I know that you had this technology. Can we work together on this? Versus before, because again, needing to sort of plant your flag on it and saying like, I need to bring income. I need to prove my worth to either my institution or my organization or my company. I can't let you have this knowledge because then I'm out of a job. And now we're saying we're trying to protect the human race. Like it's a little bit bigger right now. And so that's when you're seeing it. And it's just awesome to see everybody working together. And this is what we can do when we have one thing that we're all focused on and putting all of our efforts and energy into that.
So Meredith has two questions real quick. Any more information on the hypothesis that the MMR vaccine is partly what is preventing children from getting COVID? No, it's a good theory. Like maybe, like your immune system is working. If you get the MMR vaccine, right, it's protecting you against three viruses. Not a lot of data, mostly because there's no way to do a clinical trial, right, or any kind of study that way without exposing. Maybe later we can do something like that, but as of right now, there's not a lot. And then the other question: can you also discuss what our lives and public health response might look like with the emerging variants? So this one is interesting because you've seen in the news that a lot of states are opening up again because they're seeing a low in the number of cases. And then you look at the numbers and they're nowhere near herd immunity. They still have a substantial segment of the population that is susceptible. And so the theory is, or the expectation from people who know how to model these things well, nobody can do it perfectly, is that the third wave that we will have will be a variant wave. And then we're in trouble if they escape what we call escape the vaccine. You saw the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has good effectiveness against the variants. We don't know with the mRNA vaccines, but the good thing is that the mRNA vaccines can be switched up right away. You just have to change the code in the mRNA and package it all over again. So will there be a third wave? Yes. The intensity of it and how bad it'll be, nobody knows. But that's why we keep telling, we in public health, we keep telling folks to continue to wear the mask, to continue to social distance, even if the politicians say that it's okay to take off your mask and it's okay to open the state wide open. No, we're not there yet. Unfortunately, the data does not support and doing those things. Hopefully, most people will listen and keep everybody else safe. But we're still in it. Do we have any idea when data would be available on vaccine effects for pregnant women? Is it only the Johnson & Johnson one being tested specifically for this?
So that's a really good question. So as I will tell you from a vaccine recipient in the trial, they required that you be on birth control of some form, either, tubes tied, hysterectomy, some kind of contraception for the Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson. And actually all of the major obstetrics and reproductive health bodies said you need to actively enroll pregnant women in the trials, and nobody wants to do it because it's just a lawsuit waiting to happen. However, people got pregnant while in the trials, which is kind of funny that, the vaccine was more effective than the birth control they were using, but that's another conversation. But there's been no adverse outcomes. And I will say, having a lot of colleagues that are pregnant, and in the PA world and things like that, in the medical world, it is a tough personal decision, but there's been no reports of any fetal harm. And again, we're talking about, we know what COVID can do to both the woman who is pregnant and the baby that they are carrying versus a presumed potential risk. If anything, and what we've found from the mRNA vaccines throughout their study history is that it just won't do anything. It won't work for some reason, or it won't transmit immunity to the baby or something like that. That's honestly the bigger risk. It's not going to mess with the kid's DNA. I kind of wish they'd have superpowers. That would be amazing, but that's not going to happen. So if anything, it's just not going to protect them the way that we need them to be protected.
Nay is asking, what is the best way to share information with family members who are scared to get this vaccine because they believe it was developed too quickly? So that's a valid point, right? That is something that does bring some pause to it when folks feel that it was developed too quickly. Number one, I've given you the history. We have the historyofvaccines.org, where you can go and see the history of the mRNA vaccine, and then other sources as well. I think it's a matter of explaining to them that this technology has been around since 1990. This is how it works. This is what it does. This is what it doesn't. 30 million people now vaccinated in the United States. That's a lot, with very, very few severe adverse effects, less than the rate of car accidents. So very safe, very good safety track record. I think laying it out like that, but at the same time being respectful of their skepticism or their doubts, because you don't want to be confrontational, and just listening to them, and also sharing, if you happen to get any of the vaccines, sharing your story with them. We did a focus group with some folks who were hesitant to get vaccinated, but once they heard my story and that of other people in the group who had gotten the vaccine, they changed their mind and they told us so. And study after study with focus groups that keeps repeating that once folks hear and see somebody who is like them getting the vaccine and not having severe adverse events, their hesitancy is reduced. And if we reach enough of those folks, then we can get to a better level.
And I will say too, the biggest thing is listening, and that's what I always try to come back to is it's a fearful time right now. We have a pandemic, we had a tumultuous election cycle, we have a lot of unknowns that are happening, and those fears and then the isolation are compounding and compounding. So I just say, what are your concerns? And if they say it specifically too quickly, you can cite, well, we had DNA-based vaccines with the HPV, we've had mRNA vaccines targeted at other diseases that don't get press, and that sort of thing. There's also concerns about religious preferences and concerns about how the vaccine was developed or tested and different things like that. And I think, it's hard when it depends who you listen to on what day and what news source. But, the Pope has said, I'm down for it, and so that's a pretty high authority when it comes to that. But I get that, and I respect that decision and say, well, then we're going to vaccinate everybody that we can around you. And your part then is to wear your mask, wash your hands, socially distance, and we're going to try and keep everybody safe one way or the other. And how can we work together to do that? Whether you choose to get vaccinated or not, it's your body, your choice. But how can we just as a whole keep ourselves healthier and happier too?
So this one is good for you. Based on historic trends and your observations, how do you foresee the medical industry changing or evolving in response to COVID?
How would I like it to change, or how is it going to change? Are probably two different questions. I think telehealth, so just for a small little tangent, is that previously, you called your doctor's office and you had a question. We couldn't bill for that. And that's not about saying like, oh, well, they're just trying to nickel and dime and take money. But if you think about, I'd have to look up your chart, look at your medicines, read the question, give you a message back and all that stuff. And so that's why a lot of times they say, well, just make an appointment and I'll see you in the office to talk about your questions, because I couldn't get reimbursed for that. And spending, when I was in an office practice setting, I can spend an hour a day reviewing lab reports, responding to messages, doing refills and all these other things. And that's unpaid time of doing patient contact versus having you come into the office and I manage your care while you're there. And also just that continuity of having a conversation. But if I can bill for those visits, if I can reach you by video or by phone, and make it kind of worth both of our times, that is phenomenal. The other thing is recognizing that because of telehealth, I could be living in Maryland with a Pennsylvania license taking care of a patient in New York. how does that work? You know, and then this whole thing, and being a PA, that's another soapbox, you know, having to be tied to a physician working licensed in the state that I'm treating my patient versus where my patient's residence is versus where the clinic's residence is. All these sort of policy, legal sort of things sort of come up. And then sort of your education and your training. Oh my gosh, it gets a lot of multi-layers. But I think that that really is a huge thing. We've been doing that already with telestroke and like remote access to specialized providers. We see this a lot in like reservations or really isolated networks where they would phone into like a huge medical center to see a consultant. Dermatology can do really good stuff with videos. You know, there's a lot of things I think can happen. The other thing is I think we have a newfound respect for all members of the team. I have been so happy to see colleagues sort of congratulating and thanking the cleaning crew, whereas they were sort of, you knew they were there, but they didn't really exist. And now it's like, hey, thank you, because we recognize they're the highest risk people. They don't always have the PPP. They're in the room, they're aerosolizing everything. And they were the ones getting sick and working, you know, 3 jobs at 6 different facilities and potentially being the highest risk. So I think there's a much better appreciation for that. I'm really, though, concerned about the burnout. I think, you know, it's sort of like when there's a big fire, there's the people that run to the fire and the people that run from the fire. That's not because they're afraid of the fire, but just that respect and that appreciation for that. We're going to see a lot of people leaving the healthcare profession, a lot of people that were sort of approaching retirement, sort of enjoying the end of their careers, or had wanted a specific specialty. And this has really just sort of rocked their worlds, recognizing, seeing colleagues get sick and die, recognizing that you could take that home to your family. So I'm really also hopeful that we're improving the mental health infrastructure, reducing stigma, and saying it's okay to not be okay, and to go ahead and seek help for the helpers, as well as those that we're helping. So long-winded answer to your question. But I think there's going to be a lot of positive change. I'm hoping that a lot of it sticks.
Yeah, and public health 1.0 was the fight against infectious diseases through vaccination and sanitation. Public health 2.0 moved into chronic diseases like diabetes, cancer, etc. Now we're going to move into public health 3.0, which we kind of thought that we were there, but then the pandemic came around. It's like, oh no, we were nowhere near the transition of the social determinants of health. This has really, really, really brought home the point that how you're viewed by society, where you fit in your society, where you live in your society is more of a risk factor to diseases like this and others as well, cancer, etc., than your biology or the infectious agent. Somebody who is Latino and lives in a crowded housing has many more times the risk than I do living in a one family home, having a doctoral degree. Right. So we both are exposed. I am exposed less to the virus than that person would be when we both have similar backgrounds. So public health is going to change in that way, and that we need to take all those things into consideration. Technology, we're also developing new technologies. Zoom, right? Like we didn't used to have Skype calls all the time. Nobody says Skype anymore. That's changed. So yeah, and then citizen scientists, you see more and more people who, with open data sets that local and state governments are putting out there for people to analyze, are discovering some wonderful things, some things that make us see things in a different way because they bring in their experience of looking at the data differently. So that is going to change as well. So, we thought we were at public health 3.0. We're probably going to skip all the way to 4.0. Will the number of people who refuse to get the vaccine prevent us from getting back to the new normal?
Yes and no, because there's also high rates of infection. We don't know about the rates of asymptomatic infection. We've been so focused on getting to this point of vaccinating that we didn't have the time to do like mass serologic studies to find out. And there's so much data being produced that it's going to take years to sift through, and we're talking about risk factors. Is it just this that's your risk factor, or is it this plus this, minus this, or plus this? I was a smoker and I quit smoking 6 months ago, or if I quit smoking a year ago, did those things have an impact? All of those factors are coming into play, and that just the brain power and computer processing that required to tease that out. But the hope is it's not just the anti-vaccinated but as long as you keep wearing your mask, so if we're keeping doing all those things, wearing your mask, sanitizing, social distancing, plus the vaccinated, plus the natural infection, plus fingers crossed the variants continue to be sensitive to the vaccine, that's what's going to get us to herd immunity the fastest. And then we can kind of, again, do the catch up and get those more personalized vaccinations for the variant, or for higher risk populations, or for populations that were extremely remote, or detention centers and jails, all those kind of things, trying to hit those last sort of pockets.
And just a reminder, if you want to ask your questions, put them in the Q&A. I see some chats there that are questions. They need to go over to the Q&A, please. If I miss my second, this one's for you. If I miss my second shot, am I able to replace that with the first dose from another provider? Is there a difference between the first and second shot?
So the base answer is no difference, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna, as far as first and second shot. There is some evidence about the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, about a first dose, second dose being different. But I will say, this is again where technology has been great, is that most of the states have a statewide vaccination program that was geared towards kids, so that if kids changed school districts, they could track, did you get all your childhood vaccines and different things like that. Those now have been exploded to now having all these people access them. And this has been a hurdle of how do you track this, and so theoretically, when you make your first vaccine, you should get a reminder for the second vaccine. The most important thing is not to cross brands at this time, just because we don't know if that's going to work or not. It should, but we're not in the game of doing shoulds right now. Like, we need to be as significant, as close as possible. So the biggest thing is just making sure if you got Moderna 1, wherever you go, you get Moderna 2, and that you don't accidentally get reserved a spot for a third vaccine. There's no evidence that that's needed whatsoever, and save that shot for somebody else.
Okay. And then another question is, from my mom, having allergies to some of the ingredients in Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, and even to Epi and EpiPens. Is it possible to specifically request the J&J vaccine in Pennsylvania? Have they tested people with severe allergies in any of the trials?
So as far as specifically requesting the vaccine, most of the vaccine clinics will advertise what their vaccine is. So unfortunately, the problem is trying to get into that appointment slot at a place. So some places, because of the storage capacity, like, we are only offering this vaccine, or we're only offering this vaccine on this day. So if you can get that appointment slot to line up, that's always your choice. And you can also register, you get there and they say, sorry, this is Moderna, and you can say, no, thanks. That's absolutely your choice. Although, try and do that beforehand, just so we can give that spot to somebody else. Now, as far as testing people with severe allergies, there was, in the trials, no outright exclusion criteria, at least as far as autoimmune conditions, active treatments for, getting infusions, immunosuppressive drugs and things like that. And really, though, we're doing the trial right now. This is kind of the real world data, and getting that back as quickly as we can. My big thing is seeing if you can get it at an allergist office or in a hospital setting, because heaven forbid you do have a reaction, you don't want to have to then call 911 and wait for them to get there. You just really want to make sure that they have the treatments on site to manage you as a high risk individual.
And then Mitchell is asking, Quinn may have been asking about replacing a second dose from Pfizer with Moderna or Janssen.
Gotcha. So no, again, we are trying to keep those doses the same. So Moderna, Pfizer, or Janssen 1. The only exception to that would be is if you had a super severe reaction to one of the Moderna or Pfizer, that maybe you could get a Janssen and Janssen. If you get one Johnson and Johnson, excuse me. If you get one of those, you're one and done. So if you have a bad reaction to that, it's okay, because you're already immunized.
And then one last question, last call for questions. We're a little bit over an hour here. If I haven't had the flu shot in a while, do you think my 32-year-old body will kill me, aka shock, when I get the shot? I'm mentally preparing. I'm pretty good with taking vitamins and drink water throughout the day.
No, you should be fine. This is one of those, the only time that we're really seeing significant reactions to the first vaccine is if you actually had COVID before. And it's actually funny is that we're finding some people that didn't think they had COVID or tested negative that have that really bad reaction. And it kind of makes you wonder if they had a false negative test previously, but that's the only time we're seeing significant reactions. And again, we're not seeing shock. We're not seeing, your body will say, ow, that hurt, but there's no severity doesn't change based on the last time you introduced something. thing. So like, oh, I was on an antibiotic last week for a dental infection versus I've never been on an antibiotic because I'm super lucky and super healthy. That doesn't dictate what your severity to the reaction is to the vaccine. So, have at it. If you can get access, go for it.
Okay, no more questions. Great. So number one, last one.
Under the wire.
Under the wire. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Nate. She feels better. Thank you both. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know there's plenty more questions, right? My number one recommendation is go to the official resources, CDC, NIH, your state and local health departments, FDA, the Philadelphia Department of Health. I have some colleagues there. They're top notch. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has a vaccine education center, which is also top notch. And then historyofvaccines.org, right? And historyofvaccines.blog if you want to read the day-to-day musings of what is going on. But historyofvaccines.org, you can see our timeline. You can see some information on the vaccines. We're updating it. It's as much as we can with everything moving so fast. Thank you for your time. I know your time is very valuable. Thank you for having us. If you have any other questions, I wish I could give you my phone number, but I just can't.
That's a bad idea. But the slides can be made available, and we resourced the heck out of everything. Every single data point that we gave has a link to some other, source for information. And we're happy to put that up and provide all those resource links. But really, CDC, the FDA, all the big federal government, things. And if you don't trust the federal government, there's a lot of other places you can go. And we're happy to talk about that too. So thank you. This was great. And thanks for all the great questions.
So for the slides real quick, I will email the events at collegeofphysicians.org, and I will provide them a copy of the slides, and we have the references in the notes section of the slides, and you can look up all of that.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good
night.